Caring for our keiki is pricey. A recent study says Hawaii families pay an average of anywhere from $700 to nearly $2,000 a month for childcare. And that's if parents can even find space at licensed childcare centers. Supply is far short of demand, and wages for working parents are woefully low. Join the discussion on the high cost of childcare in Hawaii. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise. A survey conducted last year by a national child care advocacy group showed that nearly half of the approximately 66,000 children under age 6 here in Hawaii whose parents both work don't have access to high-quality, affordable child care. The numbers are even worse in rural areas, including the neighbor islands, and for infants and toddlers under the age of 2. Two-parent households pay more than 12% of their median income for quality child care. That number is closer to 45% for single-parent households. Brain development is crucial for children at this young age. We have a number of experts here tonight to discuss this situation, and we look forward to your participation in our show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and on the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guest. Navitra V. Warline is Center Director for the Preschool Division at Kama'aina Kids Kaneohe. She's been working in early childhood education for more than 10 years. Deborah Zeisman is the Executive Director of the Hawaii Children's Action Network, an organization that supports keiki and strengthens families, advocating for laws and policies to keep kids safe and healthy. Jordana Ferreira is a coordinator with Early Childhood Action Strategy. And Kaimana Brummel is a Maui resident and a working mother of 2. Thank you all for being here tonight. Deborah, I want to start with you. If you're a working family here in Hawaii with young children, what is the state of affairs when it comes to childcare?
As we know, it's really tough. We know that Hawaii is a difficult place to be a working family because families are not making enough money to keep up with the high cost of housing and the high cost of things like childcare. So we know from some recent data that Aloha United Way put out that almost half of our families are in a survival mode, that they're living paycheck to paycheck, and the tiniest of things, one problem with a car, one medical problem can really push them into poverty.
When we look at this, I wanted to call up some slides we have just to give people kind of a baseline for the numbers that we're talking about. Let's go to our first slide. This is from Child Care Aware of America. This is a recent survey that they did. So we're talking about 37,000 infants and toddlers under the age of 2 statewide, 35,000 licensed childcare slots statewide, just 11% available to infants and toddlers. So what are families to do? V, you deal with families every day through your organization. Tell us about how hard it is to get into a program like yours.
It is, and so I try to educate my families on doing the tour of my facility that as soon as you find out that you're expecting, you need to do your research, do tours, get on the waiting list, because there aren't a lot of slots, and it just kind of helps you get on multiple lists, if any, and then closer to your date, you can kind of narrow it down to which facility you choose. But the sooner you know, the better, because there aren't that many available slots.
Now,
especially
on a practical level, you were telling us about the numbers. Just tell us, you were saying on the windward side, there aren't that many options.
No, so on the windward side, there's, I believe, 3 facilities that actually cater to children 6 weeks and up. I know my facility, another one down the road, and in Kailua. So if you look at that, my center only holds 6 infants and 10 toddlers. That's it. And then the other facility holds the same 8 infants and 10 toddlers. And then all these expecting moms, that's not a lot, and then they're gonna be in that slot for 1 year, and then the toddler room another year. So you're looking at 2 years before another slot even becomes available for a newborn.
I was going to add, the statistics for Hawaii are really stark. We have what are called childcare deserts. So for all of our children under 5 right now, there's actually only 1 licensed or regulated seat for every 4 children. And when you start talking about infants and the toddlers, our youngest children, it's really bad. So there's actually only 1 seat for every 37 kids around the state. And some parts of our state, like on Kauai, there are no licensed or regulated spots. And on the Big Island, it's between 60 and 70 children for every single spot.
So where are these kids going?
That is a great question. I mean, families cobble things together. That's what we hear, I think, from a lot of families. They piecemeal, right? They might be sending them down the street to a nice lady. They might be sending them to an auntie, an uncle, perhaps grandma, kind of coordinating shifts, things like that. But our concern is children should be in a minimum a safe environment. And I think if you don't have children in a regulated spot that has Department of Human Services making sure that it's safe, that it doesn't have sex offenders or criminals in the home, things of that sort. So right now a lot of families are just doing the best they can afford and kind of what they can find, and they really have to just leave a lot to the unknown.
I know your organization works with a lot of parents and children. Tell us about the benefit of being in an accredited facility like she's talking about. Why is that important for a kid, beyond just the safety, but in terms of brain development and things like that?
So there's two major differences on like the level of care. So there's license exempt and then licensed providers. So licensed means that they're regulated by the Department of Human Services, and so the DHS is required to do monitoring visits at least once a year to make sure that facilities are in compliance and that they're meeting health and safety standards. So the state is determining what exactly that looks like, and there's a lot of changes coming down from federal regulations that just recently got reauthorized. So one of the major changes is providers now have to take 16 hours of professional development. And this is really to help enhance their knowledge and to help continue that knowledge, especially as new research or new brain research comes out, so that providers are well equipped to care for kids in developmentally appropriate ways. And I think a lot of people need to understand that when you're looking at kids from birth through 5, brain development is massively happening, much more so than throughout the rest of your lifespan. And so it's really critical to make sure that children are getting positive, engaging, profound interactions as early as possible so that we set them up for success much later on in life.
I mean, we know that this is so important. As a mom, you have 2 children. I know that they're not in the toddler phase, but you did go through this. Tell us about your own experience and how you were able to navigate this.
Hopefully I won't cry. I dropped off my kid at an unlicensed daycare at 6 weeks old. And she was a family friend, and I can't say anything bad about her. You know, she was a working mom herself that put her career on hold to open a child care because that was what was best for her and her family, and that she could stay home. But there was often 10 kids there. He was, really young. I remember just sobbing, having to go back to work because we couldn't afford for me to be out of work very much longer. He could only go for 3 days out of the week. So the other 2 days I had to negotiate with my employer to maybe take flex time. We were joking earlier about my dad being in his 70s and not really, he raised me, but I couldn't drop off my newborn with him, and he was often doing his own things or still working or still trying to do side jobs to afford work. So it was tough when my second daughter, when I was pregnant with my second child, my son was 2 and he was in a licensed daycare by then, but I chose to change careers so I could work from home. And that gave me a lot more flexibility. But as you know, since you work from home, it's not ideal. You can't be the full-time mom that you want to be, and you can't be the great employee that you want to be either. And so to be under that constant stress, so we had to try and find care for her as soon as possible so I could work and try to, I'm not even talking about advancing my career, I'm talking about just keeping my job. So that was tough. And then affordability is another issue. My family didn't qualify for any aid in any way. We were just outside of the cutoff, just a few $1,000s. And so we're feeling grateful, that we have 2 salaries and we can pretty much, but like you said in the opening, we were so close to a disaster. And so adding more childcare, we really had to make tough choices in order to get care. So, and I'm not alone. There are so many families.
Certainly not. And let's talk about those numbers. If we could go to slides 102 and 103. When we look at a married couple with an infant, if they are lucky enough to land a spot in a center, we're looking at just over $13,000 for center-based care, $8,000 for home-based care. And then when we look at families with 2 children, like you're talking about, that number for an infant and a 4-year-old, for example, jumps to $22,000 if you're in a center, $16,000 for home-based. You know, there's a difference in the price, but no matter how you look at it, this is very expensive. How are families making this happen?
Lots of ramen, I don't know. I mean, I think this is where we need to get serious as a community on how we address this. So other states and certainly other countries are treating childcare as part of community infrastructure, that it's a needed service that communities need right now. We're not back in the 50s where every family has a stay-at-home mom that's taking care of the child. That's just not the reality of families today. And the reality is childcare is expensive. You cannot afford, you can't have parents solely paying for it, or you have families. Mine was in the same situation where at one point my child care bill was higher than my rent, right? That does not work. That's not how we finance other things in our community. That's not how we finance, for example, the bus. People pay something for the bus, but there's a lot of community money that goes into having a community service like the bus as well, or utilities, or good roads. And so states that are getting serious about childcare, that are getting serious about making sure it's in place for the workforce and ensuring that we can have quality childcare workers that are also paid a living wage, they are treating it more like community infrastructure and financing it that way as well. Not just parents who can write a check can have care and parents who cannot have to just piecemeal things together.
You know, when we look at those numbers, it sounds like a lot of money, but break it down for us. What are those families getting when they pay for an accredited facility? Why is it so expensive?
Well, like she touched on earlier, first of all, you know, the extra hours, the 16 extra hours that they have to go through every fiscal year of just extra training, because times change. It's a very crucial time in a child's life. So you're paying for quality care. You're paying for educated staff that are, especially, for example, if you work in the infant and toddler classrooms, you have to have a special degree just alone to be alone with those particular children. On top of the extra hours, there's just a degree in infant toddler by itself. And then if you're in the preschool side, a completely separate degree, completely separate training to be able to deal with children ages 2 to 5. So when you're looking at that, you know, meeting the ratio per classroom, you are paying for educated staff that are trained to deal with your children, whether it be 6 weeks old or 5 years old, and then up-to-date current knowledge, not just, you know, you got your degree 8 years ago and that's with, this is, you know, times are changing, things are, you know, changing every day. So you're currently, your staff is current and up to date on education and standards and, you know, new researches and, you know, different ways of teaching and coping and nurturing. So you want to make sure that you are getting the best quality care on top of CPR, you know, first aid certifications, on top of just general proper diaper changing, breastfeeding, right temperature. There's so many fine details that goes along with working in a licensed, accredited center. I mean, just hand washing, little things that people don't think about. There's rules and regulations, and you know, you don't get that in non-accredited, you know, licensed facilities. These staff go through that, and they have to maintain those degrees and certificates in order to, for us, otherwise we lose the funding. We won't be able to accept, you know, some of the subsidies that we get if we don't maintain those standards.
And how easy or difficult is it for you to find workers?
Especially in the infant toddler side, it's extremely hard because it takes a lot to get that credential, to maintain it. And then, you know, working with infant toddlers isn't the easiest, you know. It takes I like to say, a special type of person to really be able, like, I love infant toddlers. I eat, sleep, and breathe. That's my favorite age, you know. But to me, it takes a certain person, you know, to be able to understand them, to take that training and actually imply it every day in the classrooms, to be able to articulate to the parents, to your partner in the room, and at the same time make sure the environment is not only nurturing and educating us, because we're still educating the infants and toddlers. You know, there's tummy time, there's, you know, just the bonding that happens, you know, on the day-to-day. So it's hard trying to find people that are willing to take those classes, understand them, and then be able to maintain that and actually apply it every day when they come to work, you know.
We want to involve the audience, of course. The So we have Lloyd from Waiʻi writing in. The cost of childcare is mostly labor costs. So the cost of childcare reflects the cost of wages in any location. Is there any location that does not have this problem? Are there other states that are doing this better than us? Either of you?
Well, one state that comes to mind, there's a couple of states that are doing a number of strategies that I think we should be looking at in Hawaii. So Louisiana and North Carolina both have interesting strategies. So they're doing some things with like tax credits. So to incentivize childcare workers, especially in rural areas. So again, providing some extra funding on the side. North Carolina is actually doing like direct payments out to childcare providers to kind of have an influx of money as well. I think this is where we need to get creative, right? Because it is tied to wages. Our minimum wage is also fairly low here in Hawaii. I think there's that conversation happening in the state as well. But I think again, it's if you want quality teachers, if you want people that have credentials or have a bachelor's degree, you cannot sort of pay for that level of care with what parents can afford. That it doesn't, the math doesn't pencil out right? So that's where I think states are looking at other ways of subsidizing, either subsidizing directly, like through a check, or can we do things like free tuition and tuition waivers if you go into that field so that you're not taking on student debt? Can we do tax credits so that you have a minimal tax burden if you're an early care provider in certain communities?
And I just want to quickly highlight Maui County. So Maui County actually has a child care subsidy program that's funded through the county, which other counties in Hawaii don't do currently. But that's been a very novel, creative thing that Maui County has done to really help parents offset the cost of care as well.
And in that particular instance, is it an economic threshold? I mean, how are they helping?
I believe it's an economic threshold, but it's just an additional financial support for families that are available to those in Maui County.
I know you're a Maui mom and you said you didn't quite qualify for that kind of a program. I know that you said that in preparing for tonight you talked to some other mothers. So much when you get pregnant, it's such an exciting time and you're focused on your baby shower, your birth, your doula maybe, you know, the nursery, what kind of stroller. This is not necessarily a conversation that you even really think of until suddenly you have, you know, a limited amount of time off. What are you hearing from other mothers?
Yeah, I hear that we aren't talking about it enough. I think it's fun to talk about what your nursery theme is or whether you're going to cloth diaper and all of these things. But I would really urge moms to think about childcare and what that looks like for your family. I think some people do, especially when they start planning for their second or their third, because they've experience the reality of childcare with their first, and adding a second is really tough. I heard from a nurse from Maui whose husband works for the county that they've waited over 4 years to have their second child just so that they could get their first one into a preschool before adding an infant, knowing the high cost. And they want to be able to put their child in a great space, but being able to afford that was really, really tough. And because she's a nurse and he works for the county, they don't qualify for subsidies either. So really talking about some people being thoughtful, and then there's this really large, it's called the Maui Mamas Facebook group. It gets pretty active. And almost every single day, there is a mom asking for childcare recommendations. There are certain areas on Maui where there's more childcare than others. So we're making choices about, do we have childcare near work or do we have childcare near home? With proximity to your child for emergency purposes. We have they often find a licensed place, but they don't have a space for infants, for example, because there's rules about in a license, there's only 2 under 18 months old, right? We're not even talking about, do I like the person? Is this a stimulating, happy place for my child? Do we share the same values? Are there great hours? So those are all factors that parents are searching for, and or they should be asking themselves, and some do and some don't. I think we see with the second and third child they are, but if you're having your first, please have that conversation, post that, talk to friends, reach out to the resources, because it's pretty serious.
We are, of course, a community, and so let's talk about the corporate side. Sandy from Conus asks, does Hawaii have any big companies that provide daycare on site so parents can be close to their children while also working? I posit that to either of you.
So Castle Medical Center does have a child care facility on site. I do know of a couple organizations that have explored the idea, but I think there's a lot of considerations for businesses when deciding to start on-site child care. But I do think there are a lot of businesses who are trying to find creative strategies to help support their employees, and that can run the gamut from providing FSAs, flexible spending accounts, to help offset the cost of dependent care. More flexible scheduling, so the opportunity to work remotely or to work from home so that you can maybe stay with the child. A lot more businesses are allowing children into the workplace so that families, if they don't have childcare or childcare falls through for the day, at least they can still come into work. So there's a lot of different unique strategies that I think businesses can exercise or at least explore that might not be as high cost as on-site childcare, but can still support families with young children.
Are we seeing this in practice in the way that we would hope?
Not much. I think it's an area that we're advocating for. Jordy and I were planning an event coming up soon, trying to get more businesses. It is a strategy we're seeing on the mainland more. Large companies having on-site childcare or helping with a subsidy to their workers. We don't see much of it yet in Hawaii. I think it's an area we should be considering. Again, Hawaii is seeing a declining workforce. We are seeing more of our working population leave the islands every year than coming in. It's a problem. We have low unemployment here. If we want the workforce that we need right now and for the future, this is a piece of the infrastructure the business community should be paying attention to as well. I think it's a key reason that people they're leaving. Childcare is easier to find and more affordable on the mainland in different places.
Is there, if it's not a full-fledged daycare, what is some kind of middle step that an employer could do that would make it easier? And if you're a mom who's pregnant, we were just talking about putting it out to Facebook or whatnot, and as you try to find that, is that a conversation you can have with your employer? And like, what is that conversation?
Well, as Jordan said, there's a number of benefits that they could offer. If it's not an on-site childcare, which I think is wonderful, there might also be ways that companies can encourage childcare to open in that community. Maybe it's nearby, and hui together with other companies. I think we also see on the mainland there's more examples where companies are offering often caregiving subsidy as part of their benefits package. So that might be for childcare. It might also be for kapuna care, that you're just getting extra money in your paycheck. As you might get a gym membership, or you could give them as part of the benefit. Again, to try to offset the cost, to have other people other than the parents paying the sole cost of childcare.
Wesley in Kahala says, is there room for an intermediate level of childcare, i.e. better than an auntie but not as expensive as a fully licensed college as an educated facility? If somebody doesn't get into your program, I know you said you're not even taking on the wait list at this point, so the wait list is full, which is a pretty dire situation if you are a pregnant mom and
Correct.
You're trying to find someone. Where do you see those folks going?
Like how Lee said earlier, aunties, uncles, altering their jobs if they have the the ability to do that. In-home unlicensed care. A lot of the families that still contact, hey, they're opening yet, and you reach out and you talk to them. Okay, where's baby at now, or where's your son at now? Oh, my best friend's watching him, or I'm alternating, with somebody that has another child the same age, or taking turns, days off, watching them. Like I said, who are just trying to work together to make this work, hoping that a slot will come, available, or they're in limbo waiting to see if they can get a subsidy or something to help them get into a nearest facility. But there's not a lot of choices. Like how she said, sometimes you just have to drop your child off at an unlicensed place and just, pray for the best. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There are also family child care providers, and family child care providers are registered providers, so they are overseen.
So that would be like grandma watching your own kids, or what does that
So
look
family
like?
child care are registered by the State Department of Human Services, so they also have to follow and comply with certain health and safety standards set by the state, but they operate a daycare out of their home. So they're home-based daycare providers, and they can care for typically up to 6 children. No more of 2 can be infants under the age of 18 months, but they also have to meet the 16 hours of training and meet the minimum state health and safety standards. So it's home-based care, which has a lot of advantages as well. And they are predominantly caring for a lot of our infants and toddlers. So on Kauai, for example, there aren't any infant toddler center-based programs. Most of the infants and toddlers are in family child care homes.
If you're a mom and you're, trying to figure out where to put your kid, what kind of questions would you ask someone like that? I mean, it's easy with your program, you can see the certificates, you can tour the facility. In that kind of a situation, how do you sort of suss out whether that's a good or a bad situation?
In the same way, I think, asking all providers the same general questions of, what are your qualifications or credentials? A lot of family child care providers do have really high degrees as well. It's very diverse, but you can still ask for documentation. Always ask to view the facility or the home. Actually bring your child with you, because one of the most important things is how well does this person interact with my child? Watch them interacting with other children. Do they look happy? Do they actually enjoy kids? So really a lot of the same questions, and Patch, the state designated child care resource and referral agency, actually has a whole booklet that they give every parent who calls, which has a whole checklist of questions you can ask, and even space where you can take notes if you want, and observation notes as well.
When you were navigating this yourself, how were you able to find? I know you said you left with someone that you trusted that wasn't necessarily licensed. How did you find that person and figure all of that out?
We knew that we wanted to transition to 5 days a week, so we started looking for a licensed childcare facility that could take 5 days a week. So interestingly enough, it was another mom saw a posting on Craigslist, and we found the most fabulous daycare provider. She had never posted on Craigslist before, and she never did again. So it was serendipitous. But I didn't ask all of those. I did tour the facility. She has her degree in early childhood ed. She was very much an early childhood in-home provider and took her job so seriously, which I appreciated and I admired so much in what she did. Touring the facility, asking who else is in the home during the day. That's really important. Who else has access to the kids, how often, and what is your policy on a sub? If you're not here, who else is here? I've heard of other places where, maybe the provider is a woman, but she has to go to the doctor, and so her husband is watching, or her teenage daughter, and maybe they just do it and don't tell the families to try, and I would think that most people are wanting to do a good job by the children, but it's your kid. Ask those questions, and it's your right to know that when you're leaving your child there.
Lisa in Kaneohe says, recently a baby girl died while being cared for in an unlicensed child care home. How difficult is it for an individual to set up a child care service in their home?
It's a good question. So for starters, if you rent, you do have to get approval from the landlord. Some landlords do, some landlords don't. If you're in a homeowners association, it's much harder. You do have to get liability insurance. That's a recent law that passed that I believe will be taking effect in July. And that's a little bit difficult to find and adds another financial cost. And then there's a lot of home renovations that might need to be made. So it really depends on the home. A lot more modern homes have a lot easier of a time getting licensed because they're more likely to meet a lot of the state requirements. But it really just depends on the home. And Patch actually does have a family child care recruitment program, and they have a recruiter who will go out to homes to inspect and help people walk them through the licensing process. And another really big part too is all licensed facilities do have to have a policy handbook, which is like the biggest main communication means for families, and it's a legal binding document as well. So it's really important to make sure that families are reading that and understand what it means. And I always recommend to read it thoroughly and ask questions before signing it so that you're crystal clear on what is the facility's policy. And family child care homes have to have that as well.
Okay. K-Fed wants to know, 6 weeks is too early for babies to be in daycare. A statewide paid family leave program would ease the child care burden. What are our lawmakers doing to try to help support working families? Is there anything happening right now?
You're looking at me because we're advocating on that as well. We did a big push for paid family leave last year, as some folks know. This year, the state is doing a study to try to look at some different options for how to actually run and manage that. We'll be doing another big push if folks want to advocate in 2020. And what we are asking for is a state-run, it's like a social insurance program. And we've asked for 16 weeks of partial pay. So not your entire paycheck, but between 50 and 90%, depending on sort of where you are in the income bracket, so that you can do caregiving. So that's for maternity leave, paternity leave, adoption of a new child, but also caregiving. So if your spouse becomes very ill and you need to go to the mainland
So it's
for
caregiving of
chemo,
any kind.
it's any kind of caregiving where you need up to 16 weeks of time away from your job and partial pay, because I think that's what we see right now. People I went back to work when both of my children were 5 and 6 weeks old. That's actually really common. People need it. You cannot afford it in Hawaii. You have to. You might wish to stay home longer, but you cannot. And a lot of right now it's employer by employer. So depending on who you work for, you might be given paid time if you have a very generous employer. You might be given unpaid time, but most people cannot afford unpaid time away from work.
How are we stacking up against the rest of the country on this?
We're falling behind. We now have 7 other states with paid leave laws. Vermont actually has just passed theirs, so theirs is coming into play. So there's a lot of other states that are moving on them during this legislative session that we're in as well. So I think we'll see a number of other states actually pass it this year as well. Other countries, remember, now have, it's common in other countries that you have at least a year of at least maternity leave. Paternity leave is now being added on in many other countries. Some places have even 18 months off for the birth of a new baby.
Gosh, can you imagine?
It's so crucial.
nice.
Such
But
an
again,
important
this is
time.
where we're putting folks in that really hard position that you have a new baby, you can't afford to take time off from your job or your employer won't allow it. And so if you have to go back, you might lose that job that you need. And then we don't have enough infant care in particular. That is our hardest population to find care for in the communities, are those youngest kids, and it's the most expensive. So people are stuck between this rock and a hard place right now. They can't stay home, they can't afford it, and they can't necessarily find a quality, safe, affordable place for their infants.
I mean, we all know that having kids, of course, changes your life. How many, just anecdotally, when you're talking to other mothers, having a kid is a professional left turn, as we know. But what kind of changes are you seeing women have to make as they adjust to this?
I can't think of a single mom friend who hasn't been impacted professionally by the birth of her children. And that probably goes for dads too, I want to be fair. I have a great husband who's all in as well, but I always say we tend to be the default parent when it comes to the scheduling and things like that. So when it comes to our career, we're trying to sometimes just show up, right? Other times we want to be excellent. We want to have peace of mind. I think you had alluded earlier that when you are worried about childcare or stressed about it, you're not as productive at work, right? I've had moms who, a friend of mine was a teacher for 15 years and had her kids and decided to stay home for 5. And she's an excellent teacher. So we lost an excellent teacher, so there's impact to all types of people in our community because women are taking themselves out of the workforce or they're changing it. I used to work for a nonprofit and loved what I did and served our community. And I had to take a job in hospitality because it was higher paid. And I was working for tourists, planning other people's dream vacations and not being able to afford one for my own family. And I would love to go back to nonprofits, but I can't afford that. So it has an impact far and wide once you start having kids. Yeah.
The caller wonders if the panel is aware of any state-sponsored subsidies for childcare. Where would you find out more? I know you said that there is something on Maui, but where do you even begin to look for something like that?
Yeah, so DHS does have a state subsidy program. It's administered through Res Care. It's called Child Care Connections. There are quite a bit of eligibility requirements, but the state is also exploring ways to make it more accessible to families. So I'm thinking in the near future, DHS will be putting out public hearings to revamp child care subsidy so that more families qualify for more money, which will be nice. There's also Preschool Open Doors, which is also a subsidy program specifically for preschool-age children. So it's an age and income eligibility requirement, but it does have a little bit of a higher income limit than the Child Care Connections subsidy program does. But those are pretty much the 2 only subsidy programs we have that are paid for by the state.
And you would start to find that through Patch, or where would you
Patch
begin?
can definitely help out. So Patch actually is one of the administrators of Preschool Open Doors, or you could call Res Care, but definitely Patch. They'll give you the flyers, the numbers, and everything. A lot of childcare providers are aware of the programs as well, so if you're currently enrolled in a facility, you can ask a teacher or director.
Part of during my tour process in our company is we try to educate the parents on all avenues of, have you heard of childcare where? Have you heard of Preschool Open Doors? Have you heard of, like how she was saying, Childcare Connection? Are you aware of Hawaii? Are you of Hawaiian descent? Like I try to educate them on as much avenues as them to help them bring the cost down as much as possible, because a lot of them, if this is their first time, entering this world, they don't know anything about these. Some people do their research and they find, or other family and friends have told them, or if this is not their first rodeo, their first kid, they know. But I always try to make it apparent during my tours that I, try to educate them on the different avenues, and then it's up to them to follow up and find out what the procedures are, what the application process is, and it doesn't hurt to try. But every little bit helps. And even for our company, we have our own in-house scholarships as well. There's the Jeanette Weinberg. There's all kind of, things that we just try, to push out there to help the families as much as possible, because we understand, how expensive it is, and we make sure we educate ourselves so that when the parents ask these questions, or when you discuss the tuition costs and you see, the look on their face.
Yeah, tell us about that sticker shock. I mean, there must be an element
goes
of
up
that.
every
Yeah. I mean, it does, and that's when you just try to say, I understand that, but are you familiar with Childcare Connection? Are you military? Oh, are you familiar with Childcare Where? Or are you of Hawaiian descent? Do you know about Hawaii? And I just try Preschool Open Doors. You're a 4-year-old. Okay, great. They got all this money. Contact them. You just try to get as much information out to them as possible, because every little bit helps.
But that's also a full-time job. Like, it's almost a full-time job. You have to fill out the forms. It's most of the time it's not free.
Right.
You say just try, but an extra $40 times 4 maybe. Do you have $150 to apply to hope to get more? I mean, I think what you said about creating just the infrastructure, that we're not starting off in this $1,400 a month hole. I mean, I had a mom comment and said that's her take-home pay for one of her paychecks is $1,400. And so the time that it takes to do the research, to fill out the forms, to do all of that, I think the infrastructure is the way that we need to address it.
So I'd encourage folks to look at Patch, as Jordana said. I think they help folks navigate the different options. There is a lot of paperwork. I think there is some good news and some areas where we're hoping, we need the community, I think, to start speaking up a lot more on what's needed. So I think this panel is awesome. So one thing is that Congress actually just appropriated $5 billion of new money out to the states for childcare. So that means starting this year, Hawaii is getting between $7 and $8 million of that. And there's a big push actually this year as well on Congress for $5 billion more on top of it to try to get more money flowing out. But I also think we should be pushing on folks like our county councils and our mayors. Again, as Jordana said, our Maui County has some money for childcare, but the other counties do not. I think some collective voice and action on our state to be putting more money into programs like Preschool Open Doors. So if we're able to do that, like right now the subsidies tend to be for our neediest, lowest income families, right? Which makes sense. If you have a limited amount of money, we're gonna prioritize it goes to our highest need families. If there is more money, we're able to start getting subsidies and offsetting up into our middle income families, right? And that's really the goal, is that we're able to have less copay, right? So that maybe parents are paying something, but they're not paying $1,400 a month. They're able to, half of it comes from a governmental source and half maybe is parent pay. And to not have it be just our lowest income families, but really start getting into that whole gap group in the middle where you're not rich, but you don't qualify right now. So if there's more money in the bucket, we can actually put more money out to families.
Well, we have some graphics that kind of go along exactly with what you're talking about in terms of the high cost. Let's take a quick look at 104 and 105. This first one looks at overall the high cost, of course, the median income, folks paying 12%, as we said in our open, of their in a dual income household. But for single parents, they're paying 45%. This, of course, is the median, so keep that in mind. But 45% of their checks are going to infant care, which is pretty astounding. Right. And if you look at folks at the poverty line, these are married folks with 2 kids, it says here that 79%. Now, presumably, when you look at a graphic like this, it stops you for a second. It stopped me. You have to think that perhaps those folks are living maybe in a multi-generational home, so they're not necessarily paying rent, or because 79% of your income going to childcare, that doesn't leave much for anything else. But let's look at it in terms of the actual dollars and cents. In Honolulu, you're looking at $14,000, so that's 15%. This is looking at your average annual cost, 15% of annual income. On Maui, it's about $12,000, and on Hawaii Island, just over $8,000. So this is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Emmanuel from Honolulu says that the emphasis on solving this should focus on parents, not just mom. This goes to what you were saying earlier. Lots of dads are part of the solution as well, and should be part of that conversation. Mm-hmm. How much are fathers part of this, from what you can tell?
Well, I only want to speak for my husband. I know some really great dads out there. My husband's also a business owner. He owns a small business, and he's impacted by his employees who can't show up, maybe because they have a sick child or need to leave early for pickup. That's very common. So he will maybe try to strategize and leave earlier in the morning, and then get going earlier, and then allow employees maybe to leave at 3:30 because daycare closes at 4 or something like that. Or if he has to take a shorter work day, if he's able to do that, he'll put in an extra 4 hours maybe on a Saturday. So, there's impact to him as well. I also know a lot of dads that want to be a part of their kids' lives now, and they want to be involved, and maybe that's a little harder for them when the kid is younger, that there's ways that they can be involved with the kid when they're older. And if that's doing drop-off, doing pickup, attending the preschool thing, so employers or allowing fathers and mothers to be able to do that would be really, really helpful. And then for us as a unit, just trying to make decisions together. It'd be really easy for me to go to the childcare and tour and come home and be like, well, I liked her and I like this and I like that, and he would just say yes. But can we go together? Can we make sure that you're asking your questions, that you feel good about this place and I do? So maybe asking those questions and really going into it as a unit will then involve you from the start.
I'm so glad you said that, because whenever I get an email or a phone call to set up a tour, I always ask them to bring, i.e. the spouse and the child if they're already born, if it's not a pregnant mom. Bring the whole family, bring two if you have to, because I really want everybody collectively to see what you're getting yourself into. I want you to feel from the start, as like she said, a unit, what this is all about, because there could be questions that you never even thought of until you step foot onto, the campus or the center itself, and then we're in this together, you know what I mean? And then it kind of forces them to be involved, so to speak, right from the jump. And then I kind of always ask the dad questions. So, you have any concerns, or what do you think about this? You know what I mean? Because sometimes they feel uncomfortable because they don't know what to ask. And even moms, some of the new moms are just like, oh my God, I never would have thought to ask that or whatever, because you don't know that world until you get there. So I've crafted my tour to answer all the questions that you never would have thought of answering. You know what I mean? And then I have some that I had one the other day that had questions I've never been asked in my 10 years. And I was like, I have to write these down. They were awesome. You know what I mean? But she did so much research, and it was crazy. But I loved it. And the husband was just staying there, so I kind of had to reel him in to get him involved too. By the time they left, they were just like, they emailed me from the car in the parking lot to say, we want it, we're in. And it just makes me feel as a provider, okay, good. They left with peace of mind. They got all their questions answered. It was a collective thing together, and now they can breathe a little easier because this part is done. Yeah. And now they can just focus on the journey and the pregnancy.
So much of when we talk about the child care, we talk about maternity leave. How much paternity leave are dads really getting? How much are dads part of that infant care equation right now?
Currently, they're not. But moms aren't getting leave, nor are dads in Hawaii, really. It's very minimal. I think this is what we're advocating for. It should be moms and dads, right? That's why it's family leave. It's not maternity leave that we're discussing. I think both here in Hawaii and as a nation. This is 2019. Dads are caregivers too.
Yeah. I see you nodding your head. Why is it important to have men part of this conversation?
I mean, I think we're seeing a change in trends anyways with younger generations as dads taking on a bigger role and being a lot more present and active, but dads play a very important role in the success of their children as well. And there's tons of studies out there that show that, you know, children do thrive if dads are present and engaged. So I think it's important to support dads, and it's interesting because as we're talking about this, I recall a council member for Honolulu who mentioned that he was actually taking one of his infant daughters into the men's bathroom to change her diaper, and he realized there weren't any changing stations. So he actually got an ordinance passed for any city and county bathroom that's built should now have a changing station in the men's bathroom. So I think that trend is going to continue. Yes. Very excellent to hear. But I think dads want to play a role in their kids' life. You know, every parent, I truly believe, wants to make sure their kids are successful. And so how can we make sure that fathers are at the table as well and part of that discussion?
I mean, if we're going to get the kind of policy changes we want, obviously men have to be part of that conversation.
Yes. And these are family issues. They're not women's issues. They're not men's. They're family issues.
We have two questions about children with special needs. I know that that could be its own show, but I definitely want to get to those. Sandra in Hilo says the Department of Education has special education preschool starting for 3-year-olds. Do licensed programs support special needs children? And John in Kahala says, who cares for children with autism in Hawaii? Are there facilities for kids with special needs?
My facility has quite a few.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't discriminate at all. For us, we'd assess the child and just figure out where the child is at as far as cognitively, social, emotionally wise, and then place them in the classroom we feel best meets the needs of where that child is at. You know what I mean? So I have, you know, a child, let's say age-wise is 2, but cognitively is still 18 months. He's in the infant room or the toddler room because that's where he needs to be safety-wise, cognitive-wise, things. And it just plays into the ratio. We don't, you know, we want that. We want that, you know, integration. We want it to be there. And then when they do age out, where they're able to go to the DOE and the special education classes, they go there. But until the time being, where are they going to go? So, of course, you would research and find facilities. And I get calls all the time. We have some that come on the bus to my facility every day. When school gets out, the bus picks them up from their elementary school and brings them to my facility. We sign them in, and they're there from 2 to 6 p.m. every day. You know, and we just treat them like everybody else, and we just figure out, you know, how to incorporate our program around all of their children, regardless.
How is that for home daycares? I mean, I guess that is case by case, but these providers aren't necessarily trained specifically to deal with children with special needs, are they?
It's case by case, but then generally for the children from birth until 3 years old, what they also will have is what's called early intervention. So that's through the Department of Health, but then those children are assessed and then they're given care coordinators or speech therapists, occupational therapists, skills trainers. So that is from birth until 3, it's coordinated by Department of Health. And so they would then have potentially a care provider like Kama'aina Kids, but also have other specialists that are working with that child at site or at home, depending on the needs of the child. And then once they're 3, then they qualify for the Department of Education program, so they kind of transition over.
In that case, parents have to be really on top of it because that sounds like so much coordination.
And then sometimes the parents don't really know. Sometimes we're the ones that are like, hey, you know, we have to have that conversation where we feel like, you know, and we're the ones that bring it to the table and ask, you know, you might want to, you know, talk to the pediatrician or get a referral, because sometimes you just don't know. And then us having the training that we have to just be able to look at the spectrum just to try to see, you know, some things maybe a little bit, you know, different. And then from there, like I said, the skills trainers come in, early intervention comes in, and they're great. They work with us, they work with the staff, and some of them are on the site with the children all day in the classrooms with us, and they're just there with that child to help them, you know, get through the day-to-day like the other children until they age out and can qualify for the DOD services.
I was going to say, I think actually our child care professionals across the state play probably the most important role in identifying things early that are issues, because they do have that background about child development. Parents may not, right? Most of us are not child development experts. A pediatrician often sees the child for 10 minutes versus a place like V, they see the child all day. So they are the eyes and ears to often identify, I think this child might need some extra services, and get them into those services early, which is when we know they're actually most effective to kind of correct things things, so they don't end up perhaps in like special ed once they hit kindergarten and down the line. So we actually see that's a great thing about our early care and education system. Kids that aren't in that system, often special needs are identified much later.
And like she was saying earlier, part of that extra 16 hours that the staff and even directors that we have to go through, special needs is also one of the trainings and credentials and classes that we have to take on a regular basis so that we are able to identify and be able to spot things early on when they're with us all day long. So that's just one of the classes that we have to take as, you know, early childhood providers and teachers and caregivers.
Bernie's writing in saying, I wish I lived closer to my daughter so that I could help with taking care of my new granddaughter. I can't believe the cost of childcare nowadays. Not only is it difficult to find childcare, but many people are just working to pay for it. It's so sad. That's Bernie writing in. A lot of families, as we talked about, are relying on a grandma or an auntie or an uncle to help. How do we fill that gap if they are not able to go to a place like Kama'aina Kids and they are doing a home situation? How do we give families the resources if they are in a family situation where it's not a licensed situation, you know, like it's just Tutu taking care? How would you suggest that we make sure that grandma is supported and being able to give those kids what they need?
So one option that some unlicensed folks might exercise is still going through DHS subsidies. Because you still can receive subsidies, it's a lower dollar amount, but at the very least you have to meet this checklist, and it's self-verifying, but it's ensuring that the home is safe. Background checks are required, and if you're on that list, there is an organization called Learning to Grow, which does provide materials that they mail out, I believe, once a month, including to licensed exempt providers that talk about activities providers can do to engage with children. So it's meant to kind of enhance the quality of care, to build on skills and knowledge of providers, and that's something that they do even for the licensed exempt population.
Well, that's a tremendous resource, because you got to imagine that there are grandmas who are suddenly taking care of infants and they don't necessarily know, or it's not that they don't want to do a good job, it's just that, you know, since the last time they took care of a baby, things have changed a little bit.
Yes, and Patch offers free, completely free training classes as well, all around every island, and anybody's welcome to sign up for it. In fact, a lot of our classes we're really hoping for a bigger enrollment anyways, but parents, licensed exempt providers, licensed providers, anyone in the community is welcome to take them.
And they have them online as well too, evenings. It's my staff and I mean, it's amazing. It's been a godsend just to get that, you know, that training in. And then also, you know, when you got Tutu and family and friends, you know, our facilities also offer part-time care. At least it's something to help. You know, so if you can't afford the full-time at the time, there's 3 days a week, there's 2 days a week, there's half days. But we just pick up at 12:30, and then you just got to figure out 12:30 to, you know, whatever time. So at least, you know, to Kama'aina Kids, we try to offer all of that to at least help you with something, you know, versus no care at all. You know, you can at least have the option to, can you afford 3 days a week? Let's start with that, you know, while we're trying to figure out the rest.
I was going to add, there's two other, I think, great resources that we have in Hawaii that we're also trying to grow. So one, the technical term is family-child interaction learning, but those are programs, and they kind of were born here in Hawaii and are now being replicated on the mainland. So programs like Tutu and Me and Keiki Steps that are run by a variety of nonprofits around our state, actually the YMCA as well. And those are programs that are great if it's grandma or grandpa or uncle or an unlicensed care provider. So it's where the child and the adult caregiver go together to programs, and they're often like 3 mornings a week. Sometimes they call them traveling preschools. So it's not, you don't drop the child off, but it's support as well. So they do professional development for the caregiver, giving them ideas of things you can do with the child, being able to talk to other adults, which is one of the nice things if you've taken care of young children. And it's also programs for the children as well. So we have a great network of programs around the state, and we're actually trying to grow it. They're very popular. There's often a huge wait list, but that's a supportive program that helps both the children and the caregiver, whether it's a family member or another caregiver.
I know they're incredibly popular. When I had my daughter, I signed up for Tutu and Me, and they called me literally 2 years later.
Right.
It was very, very popular. So, but where would you start?
Well, so we've been advocating for more state funding for that as well. And then the other piece is a new thing that we have this year, which is a campaign called Little Minds Matter. So folks Google Little Minds Matter Hawaii, and there's a fantastic app that we're promoting in Hawaii now called Vroom, which goes on your phone, and it sends sends you tips. You put in the name and age of your child, and it sends you developmentally appropriate activities and tips and things you can do every day with your child. So again, if it's grandpa who doesn't know what to do, grandpa can look, and it gives you ideas where, and you don't necessarily have to have a lot of money or a car or anything else. It's just things that gives you ideas of things you can do with that child from birth to age 5.
Right, because so much of the care is at home, and we don't want to necessarily park our kids in front of the TV.
And how do we support families in that way? So those are 2 other great resources.
I know we're almost out of time, but Jordan has a question last here. Are there any current organizations or collaborations across the island chain that are actively addressing the high costs of childcare in Hawaii that we can capitalize on and support? If people are watching this and they want to support what your organization is doing, or if they want to try to get their lawmakers to address this issue, where do you start? We have less than a minute.
Well, I think the Early Childhood Action Strategy is a wonderful public-private partnership where we're having a lot of these conversations. And then Hawaii Children's Action Network, we do have a growing network of advocates, family advocates, and we send out alerts and things of like, you know, call your congressman today and let them know we need more child care money, so they can sign up as an advocate on our website.
Fantastic, and we're almost out of time, but I do want to give you the last word as a mom. What would you say to other mothers out there or parents-to-be who are watching this? How would you recommend they start?
Just have conversations with people. I call Patch. You can really count on them. I also just wanted to add that this isn't just an issue for parents. If kids in Hawaii succeed, we all succeed. So it's all of our responsibility to invest in 0 to 5 and make sure that our Hawaii kids are really taken care of.
And that's a fantastic place to leave it. Thank you so much. Mahalo to you for joining us tonight. We, of course, thank our guests, Navitra V. Warlane with Kama'aina Kids Kaneohe, Jordana Ferreira, Coordinator with Early Childhood Action Strategy, Deborah Zeisman, Executive Director of the Hawaii Children's Action Network, and Kaimana Brummel, a working mom of 2 from Maui. Next week on Insights, did you know that there are rules that govern how attorneys do their job here in Hawaii? We'll look at the Hawaii Rules of Professional Conduct. Please join us. I'm Yanji Denise for Insights on PBS Hawaii. A hui hou.